PFF's lead analyst. It is the one, the only, Sam Monson.
Sam, listen, man, shout out to you. I'm going right in on him. Nowadays, everybody, when their players and on their teams do well on PFF, they clap it up for them. But let that grade be anything different from what they thought, and they be saying, how does PFF know what's going on? How do they just get to be the end-all, be-all? Can you explain to us what goes into these grades? And one of the big things, one of the big keys is they say, how do they know what play they're calling? If you don't know what play they're calling, how are they giving these grades out? Floor's yours.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a new thing, right? That's been the dynamic we've been dealing with since day one. If people like the PFF grades, if it matches what they want to see, if it says their favorite player is great, it's the best thing out there. It's the source. It's where we want to talk about. And then as soon as it goes the other way and your favorite player is grading badly or something that you didn't want to happen is showing up in the grades, they don't know what they're doing. Like PFF's not in the room. They don't know the play call, all that kind of thing. So, this is not a new development, but I mean, really, the idea of the grading is to just quantify the stuff that we talk about but don't actually try and put numbers to, right? So going through the tape, play by play, and recording, did a guy do a good job, a bad job, or something in the middle, and call it a wash and move on. And yeah, there's going to be plays where it's impossible to know, the exact assignment if you're not in that meeting room and you don't know a specific switch or a specific call. But I think that's a very small percentage of plays. Generally speaking, everybody is running an outside zone play. Everybody is running an inside zone play. There are coverages that look the same team to team to team. And you can generally tell from what, 10 guys are doing what the 11th guy should be doing. So I think overall, simply the exercise in going through and trying to document and quantify all these things is way more valuable than the margin for error that is created by the fact that it can never be perfect if you're outside of that meeting room.
Sam, I got a question now. 3 weeks ago, I think y'all posted this left tackle for the Steelers, posted this grade, and I just need to know if it was a typo or not. What was it? What did he do?
It was like 3.4%.
Dan Moore's pass block grade
against the
PFF
Browns.
Against the Browns and Myles Garrett was 3.5.
Was that a typo? Wow. Did somebody forget the zero? Because there's
the lowest grade ever?
There's no way.
It's not the lowest grade ever, but Dan Moore's grade, it's funny, like Steelers fans sometimes act like Dan Moore is, the worst left tackle in the NFL. Dan Moore's grade when he's not facing Myles Garrett is like 66 or something like that. So it's average, slightly above average even. And then when he faces Myles Garrett, it's 18 point something for his NFL career. Wow. So this is a guy that gets turned into one of the worst tackles in football when he has to go up against Myles Garrett. And when that doesn't happen, he's perfectly serviceable as a left tackle.
How many? Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, when you look at the tradition, and I'm unlike some people in the business, I'm a big time pro PFF guy. I'm a subscriber. I'm all in with you guys. So, but when you look at a guy who you watch like Myles Garrett, for example, versus T.J. Watt, the traditional old school statistics, T.J. Watt is better than Myles Garrett across the board. But on PFF, Myles Garrett is consistently, not that T.J. Watt gets bad grades, but Myles Garrett is consistently rated higher. But yet a lot of people can't get over the fact that the old school statistics say T.J. Watt's better. So explain that to the fans, please.
Yeah, I mean, we know that old school statistics are a bad way of measuring things, right? We all know this on a case-by-case basis, but when it stacks up in your favor, you tend to forget that. Like, we know that sacks are not a particularly good way of measuring pass rush. It's even an elite player, we're talking 20 plays over 1,000 snaps in a season, right? The kind of margin for error in there is crazy, particularly when you know sacks are not all created equal. Some of them are great plays. Some of them, Michael Strahan broke the record because Brett Favre slid down in front of him and gave him a sack, right? That counts exactly the same as the best sack you've ever seen in your life, where a guy beats, a double team, splits it at the line, gets on top of the quarterback in 1.5 seconds and make that play. So we know sacks or interceptions are not necessarily the best stats in the world. And the bigger a sample size you can create on whatever it is you're trying to measure, pass rush in this case, the better the data is going to be. So we look at every single pass rushing snap, and we're grading every single pass rushing snap. And Sometimes those are going to generate sacks and forced fumbles and those splash plays, and sometimes they're not. But they all count. They're all making an impact on the game, even if it's not necessarily getting rewarded by those high impact, high leverage plays. Generally speaking, both those guys are incredible pass rushers, right? TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, either one of them is an all-pro caliber guy. Either one of them is a defensive player of the year caliber guy. But over their careers, TJ Watt has tended to get a few more splash plays, those sacks, forced fumbles, interceptions, than Myles Garrett gets. And Myles Garrett has tended to win a little bit more consistently and a little bit more on average, on a given pass rushing rep, right? And it's where that balance lies. How much credit do you give the guy for making the more impact plays versus how much credit do you give the guy for consistently winning more often? And I don't know that there's necessarily a correct answer to that question, but that's the dynamic that you're playing with between those two.
Sam, one of the things that we always talk about on the show, because we do PFF segments every week on the show, and one of the things we always talk about is how the hell you guys even get this done. There are, I'm guessing, 1,500 plays in an average NFL week. I don't know. I'm just picking a number at random. And there are, 40 players that are playing a significant amount of time. How many people do you have on your staff? How long does it take to grade one player start to finish, one game? How in the world do you guys get this done?
Yeah, it's a lot of people and a lot of man hours go into this. We're able to do the grading during games, so we don't have to wait until things stop. We don't have to wait. We have a hook in with tape supply. We're able to get a full access to everything we need during games. So as soon as those performances start, we can start working on our processes, and everything is broken down within games to kind of smaller subsets so that one person can go through and do pass rushing versus pass protection. One person can do coverage versus receiving. One person can do run blocking versus run defense. And all these things can be going on concurrently and to try and get everything done as quickly as possible. So, yeah, there are a lot of people. I think our analysis staff is up to like 70 people, something like that.
Wow.
An army of guys, part-time guys doing the kind of more black and white data collection type stuff that enables all of that to work, right? Down and distance, spot of the ball, all this kind of thing in order for the kind of packet to be there for the analysts to then come in after and actually start putting grades and final numbers to all these things.
Sam, I got a conspiracy theory, and I want to see if you're going to throw a cherry on top of this thing. We all know how great Nick Chubb was. I have a theory. The Cleveland Browns offensive line, we gave them a lot of credit for a lot of things, but I think that Nick Chubb really covered up some areas where they have some areas of opportunity or are performing as well. I mean, Nick Chubb, his vision, being able to find backside cracks, make the first guy miss, and then make the pile move forward. I think Nick Chubb really is an impact when you take him out of the offense as far as the offensive line in the passing game. What have you guys seen from the difference from the Browns offense with Nick Chubb to the few games that they don't have Nick Chubb?
Yeah, in theory, everybody wants to try and isolate, each individual player from everything that's going on around him. And to an extent, that's what the grades are trying to do. But football is so interdependent. Everything has 3 or 4 or 5 confounding factors that go into it. So when you're trying to isolate the play of just Nick Chubb, the running back, you can factor in what the offensive line does for him. But I think you start to see when you take him out of the lineup, the impact that he has on the offensive line as well. And you're right, it's going to be significant. It's still a good offensive line. It's still doing a good job. A guy like DeJuan Jones coming in, he's been fantastic in terms of pass protection, still has a ways to go in terms of run blocking. So it's not quite the way it was last year. But you see that Nick Chubb can turn a well-blocked play by everybody up front. Nick Chubb can make that into something spectacular. And the guys they have at the moment can't necessarily replicate that. So even if the blocking is the same, it has a significant impact on the kind of overall production. And that's true, I think, in pretty much every facet of play, every position you can think of. It isn't just what that player brings to the table. It's the impact, the knock-on effect that he has on the players that surround him or other elements of the game, whether it's offense or defense.
Sam, how much of an influence do you think PFF has on whether or not an organization decides to pay a player?
I think it depends on the player. I think it depends on their representation in terms of what they're bringing to the table to argue their case. You know, how they're kind of trying to negotiate. I think it's involved in every negotiation, right? On probably both sides of the equation. The agents are using it, and here's the data that makes our guy look good. Here's why you should pay him. And then teams are fighting back with, well, here's the data that says he isn't good, or that we can get the same production from somebody else, or whatever. You know, I don't think we're sort of actively involved in these things, but I think pretty much every negotiation that takes place, there's PFF data backing up probably both sides of the argument.
Sam, Baker Mayfield, we always still pay attention to him. Last year he was awful. This year so far he's been very good. I think I had him. I think you guys have him 13th in terms of passing grade. I think I took out, or maybe I took out Andy Dalton because he only played one game. But so he's, so 13. I mean, 13th is good. It's not amazing, but how would you analyze his play so far this year for those who haven't watched play in and play out?
I think this is the best version we've seen since before he was injured in Cleveland, when we thought he was going to take that step forward and really be their answer as a franchise quarterback. His career had kind of fallen apart over the last couple of years. And a lot of what's happened in Tampa Bay so far this season has been the offense and the scheme and the play calling and kind of putting him in a pretty good position to succeed. But he's been taking advantage of that. He's been hitting the open guys. He's been taking the open first read and getting the ball where it needs to go. But the last couple of weeks, I think he's started to add to that as well. He's not just taking what's there and sort of managing the offense. He's actually bringing some plays to the table as well. And I think now we're starting to see Baker adding value on top of what's still a very good offense, a very good scheme, and a very good play calling setup. And that's kind of giving them, I think, some real impetus to move forward and to develop as an offense. I think this is, if you're a Bucs fan, I think it's pretty exciting because I think you're starting to see Baker get back to being the player that we thought he was before everything went off the rails.
Sam, let's bring it to our quarterback, Deshaun Watson. He's been a bit of an enigma. He certainly hasn't been the guy that we saw in Houston. But then he had the week, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, where we started to see real growth and progress. And I know the Tennessee Titans secondary wasn't the greatest, but what are you seeing in Deshaun Watson and his career arc?
Yeah, it's a really tough kind of career to analyze. He, I think, was generally grading a little bit worse than his numbers suggested when he was early in his Houston career. And then the last thing we saw was him putting a season together that looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And then obviously the time out of the game. And when he came back for Cleveland last season, just wasn't that guy. Whether it was rust, whether it was a new environment, whatever. He looked pretty rough last season. I think Jacoby Brissett was a better quarterback than Deshaun Watson last year. And then this year, the big question was, well, was it just rust? Are we going to see him get back to being the player he was? And that hasn't happened yet either. But I think you're right. We started to see signs that maybe he's starting to turn that corner and put it together a little bit more. I think we've seen fewer mistakes from him this year than we did a season ago. That's a big step in the right direction. I think he's still a little bit behind in terms of making those big special plays that we expected him to bring to the table. But overall, I think we are slowly moving in the right direction. It's just a case of how long it takes him to cross that gap, to bridge that gap to where he used to be, right, and whether he can get back all the way.
Sam, our producer, Mike, was asking before the show, we were talking about potential show topics with the Browns on a bye over the next couple of weeks. And one of the questions he asked was, is Grant Delpit the best safety in football this year? And at first reaction, you think, well, that's kind of crazy because he hasn't been anywhere close to that. However, according to you guys, he has been, so far, the fourth best safety in the NFL behind only Jesse Bates of the Falcons, Javon Holland of the Dolphins, and Andre Sisco of the Jaguars.
There's a method to my madness.
There you go. So Mike's not as crazy as he sounds, right?
Yeah, and one thing, when you're 4 games into a season, the sample size is really small, and in particular for safeties, it's going to be swayed by big defensive plays. So Jesse Bates, right, had those 2 interceptions against rookie quarterback in the first game. Each one of these guys has got at least one really big play to their name, which is going to help boost that grade. But Delpit has been fantastic in this defense. I think we're seeing what a lot of people at draft time really liked about Delpit, and safety is one of those positions in particular where it's so kind of volatile and fluctuates year to year who the best guys are. And it's so sort of dependent on being in the right place at the right time that I don't think that there is a consistent, this guy is the best player at that position in the league, and that's what it's going to be for the next 5-6 years. It's going to change year to year. And a guy like Delpit, like, this might be his season.
See, I'm curious, when it comes to, you talked before about like not all sacks being equal. Well, not all interceptions are equal either for both the quarterback and the guy making the interception. Well, if a ball is tipped up in the air off a wide receiver and it gets intercepted, well, that's not generally the quarterback's fault. In the same vein, if I'm a cornerback and the quarterback throws the ball right to me, that's not, as opposed to, I think a couple of weeks ago in the Rams-Bengals game, there was a Rams player that made an incredible interception against Joe Burrow where he made a diving play to get, like, are those graded equally, differently too?
Yeah. Those are graded differently because they're very different plays, right? That's part of the difference between grading the process, grading the thing that the player actually did, and the results of that play. If we just wanted to assign credit for the results of any given play, you don't need the tape. You can just work from the box score, right? You can work from the play-by-play. You don't actually need to dive in and see, well, this was a screenplay, right? Like last night is a good example in a couple of different ways. Drew Lock throws a simple out route, right? And the entire Giants defense stops playing, and that slant route, or that out route rather, turns into a 50-yard touchdown play, right? Nothing Drew Lock did created that 50-yard touchdown play other than simply deliver the ball into the hands of the guy that was only a few yards away in terms of air yards. It's a routine play, but the result changes dramatically after the fact. So Drew Lock's grade doesn't change because multiple Giants fell off tackles, because Noah Fant kept tiptoeing down the sideline and turned it into a 50-yard touchdown. And Devin Witherspoon as well gets a pick six, but the pick six was thrown directly to him, right? So all he had to do was catch the ball and then run the length of the field. Now, he does get a little bit of extra credit for actually making that return, running the length of the field. He had to make a cut to make sure that he wouldn't get chased down from behind. So the pick six, the fact that he scored, the fact that he did execute that return and get it into the end zone, gives him a little bit of a bump in grade, but he doesn't get a boost. It doesn't get graded as an incredible play in coverage from an interception standpoint because it is thrown directly to him. So there's always, in our grading, there's nuance between, when a play was qualitatively very good versus when he just got kind of lucky and the result of the play is very good.
Sam, I have to shout my guy, John Costco, out. I appreciate him. He's always, he works for PFF, and he talks about some of the grading. And I was laughing. He was like, yeah, I got Air Force tape to do. I said, you're grading Air Force? Like, you guys do an extensive college program as well. Like, they're grading college plays too. So that's crazy to have that much bandwidth. Yeah. But this question actually comes from Steve Becker. He says, does the same analyst grade the same players every week or the same teams every week? Or do you kind of mix it up so everybody kind of touches and keeps it, copacetic, I guess?
Yeah, it's mixed up. Number one, because it's broken down into those specific processes, right? So you're not simply grading, one side of the ball the whole way, or even one team the whole way, one unit. You are grading pass rushing versus pass protection or whatever it is. So it does get mixed up. And the other thing it does is it helps prevent those kind of accidental biases that could creep in. Not necessarily because a guy is a raging Browns fan or whatever, right? But because one guy might have a slight tendency to lean in a certain direction on these specific plays. But if you're mixing that all up and everybody is kind of cross grading various things, you're not skewing any one data set by one guy being slightly off, that straight and narrow path of what the optimal grading is. And that is a potential, that's a challenge, right? Is how you keep that large a number of people all on the same page when it comes to grading these things. Well, one of the ways to offset that is to try and mix it in and to try and cross grade as much as humanly possible, so that all those potential frayed edges or extremes get pulled back together to the center.
Sam, last thing, how much are Deshaun Watson and DTR, I guess, combined, based on his game last week, to blame for the sacks that the Browns have given up in comparison to other teams? Are they, what end of the scale are they at?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, well, the scale is being extended this season. Aside from anything else, Sam Howell is sort of setting new depths of the extreme that can go to. That guy is a walking sack magnet. Deshaun Watson has always been a quarterback that takes a lot of sacks, and by taking a lot of sacks, I mean ones that he is sort of responsible for. More than just is involved in an offense that gets sacked a lot. So they've been responsible for a couple of them each, and obviously for DTR that's a higher percentage or a higher rate than Deshaun Watson because of playing time. But I think they've been sacked at times when it hasn't been their fault. So they're not at that Sam Howell end of the spectrum where they are making this thing look an awful lot worse than it's been and are taking tons of sacks that aren't on the offensive line at all. They're contributing to it a little bit, and as I say, Watson will skew in that direction. But if anything, I think it's more that fuzzy area between the two, right, where you're not charging them for the pressure necessarily. It's not their fault, but they both hold onto the ball longer than most quarterbacks. They're both going to make the blocking job of the offensive line more difficult because they simply have to pass protect for longer. The ball's not coming out in 2.3 seconds every single play. It's coming out in 3 seconds every single play, more or less. And that, I think, is the biggest area where they're contributing to the sacks. They're just sort of increasing the difficulty rating that these offensive linemen have to work with.
Sam, great insight, man. We appreciate you taking the time.
I've got another hour's worth of questions, but I know we don't have the time.
Thanks, Sam.
Sam, great stuff. Keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll get you back on later in the season.
Anytime. Take it easy, guys.